Mr Marshall, and I would like to begin by congratulating the Honourable Member for Uxbridge on securing this debate. Clearly it's a particularly timely week for us to hold this debate. He rightly highlighted the potential of conflicts in the Balkans to spill over to the rest of Europe and the historical background that we're well aware of. And so it is true that we do need to take great care with foreign policy in this area, and that's why it's very welcome to have the opportunity, such as today, to scrutinise the government policy in the area and indeed put questions to the Minister. We all, I'm sure, remember the horrors of the ethnic cleansing and the violence in the Balkans in the 1990s, which was perhaps all the more shocking because it was so close to home, and indeed in a country that had been for many years a popular holiday destination of many Brits and very familiar to many of our constituents. And to see the scenes that we saw unfolding on the television somewhere so close, I think was particularly moving. I'm going to strike a slightly different note from what we've heard so far in this debate, because I, for one, and my party also, very much welcome the Kosovan Declaration of Independence and the recognition of Kosovo by this government. But we do agree this must not be allowed to set a precedence, and that must be made very clear indeed.
Would you want Lady Giveaway?
Certainly.
McKinley.
I'm truly bewildered by the statement, we welcome the Kosovan independence. As I indicated, many of us wish Kosovars well, but how on earth does she expect or hope Kosovo will come into the European Union, particularly if Serbia is admitted and the criteria is met on the war crime? If Serbia is admitted, it has a veto on expansion of the European Union. Kosovo cannot and will not be advanced by this Declaration of Independence because it cannot become a member of the United Nations and it cannot become a member of the European Union. I'm bewildered how this is the great leap forward for the Kosovars.
Swinson.
Well, first of all, I certainly, I believe it's a step in the right direction. I think we would be far too premature to describe it as a great leap forward. We're clearly at very early days. And I will, in the rest of my speech, outline how I hope in future Kosovo will be able to be a member of the European Union, but that will not be without its difficulties, as it will not be without its difficulties for Serbia. And I think the Honourable Member makes a very good point, which underlines just how difficult and sensitive this issue is. There is not going to be a magic solution to the situation in the Balkans. There never has been over the past century and before, and I think we would all be far too optimistic to imagine that one would suddenly present itself now. It's a question more of judging what the best path forward is with recognising its difficulties.
John Randall.
Just like, if possible, she could just give an indication of where her party stands with regard to United Nations resolutions.
With regard to Kosovo, well, obviously the United Nations Resolution 1244 is in place, and we very much would have hoped that it would be possible to get Russia on board. Obviously, that's clearly not going to happen, as became obvious through the months and years of negotiations on this issue. But that was very similar to the situation when, in fact, the UK government through NATO took action in Kosovo, and I think we do recognise that in some cases where there is a pressing humanitarian need or ethnic cleansing going on, it will not always be possible to get unanimity across the entire United Nations. Does he want to?
Not correct. I'm very grateful for coming a second chance. If I'm not mistaken, her party was very keen on a United Nations mandate for the bombing of Iraq and the invasion of Iraq.
Swinson.
Well, that is certainly true, and I think also at the time what we were also keen on was to preserve international consensus and to follow that international diplomatic process to its end through the inspectors under Hans Blix who were there, and of course that process was not followed through to the end. And I think what we have seen is different in this case, because there have been exhaustive attempts to bring the parties together, and it did become very clear that indeed there was an immovable obstacle that could not be got round, whereas in the Iraq situation actually there was quite a lot of international consensus for giving Hans Blix much more time to actually do the job on weapons of mass destruction, which may have actually led the international world to come to more of a consensus. But returning, Mr Marshall, as I'm sure you would wish me to, the subject of the debate today, in addition to welcoming the Declaration of Independence, I will also just touch briefly on the importance, as has been mentioned, particularly by some of the points in the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury in Action speech, of preventing ethnic violence and protecting minority rights. And then briefly to touch on the challenges ahead for Kosovo and the future possibilities for it and indeed the other Balkan states within the EU. The status quo was not an option. UNMIC was always a temporary measure and was never going to be able to continue into perpetuity. And so I think it is right that we recognise that and then look for the best solution. For the past 7 or 8 years, my father has been working out in Eastern Europe in a variety of regeneration and economic development programmes for World Bank, DFID, EU and so on. And most recently he's actually been working in Kosovo itself for the Ministry of Health. And so I've enjoyed very many fascinating conversations trying to get to understand the country and mindset a little better. And indeed he's got the advantage of the very interesting position of working both with Kosovans and Serbs within the ministry, who obviously will often have slightly different perspectives on an issue. The Honourable Member for Uxbridge mentioned the apparent parallel with Northern Ireland, and the way I would say actually that this situation is very different from that faced in Northern Ireland is actually the sheer extent of the ethnic cleansing which we saw that took place in Kosovo. And in fact, this morning actually I telephoned to speak to one of my dad's colleagues. He'd mentioned her story to me, a lady called Albana. And she told me just her experience. In March 1999 there was a knock on her door. And it was the Serbian army, and they told her that she had 24 hours to leave her home, and if they came back in 24 hours and she was still there, she would be killed. So she took her 8-month-old son, and she went with her husband, and they drove towards the Macedonian border, and they had to abandon the car because the sheer volume of traffic and queues, and walk the final 20 to 30 kilometres across the border into Macedonia, at which point they had to wait at the border for 2 days, and then finally leave. Now, the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury and Action mentioned just how appalling that situation would be, and I think we would all feel that when that happens to anybody, but that was not just happening to one person. That's Albana's story, but that is a story that is replicated by many Kosovars, and that is just within such recent living memory of just the last decade that it just becomes very clear that it will be impossible for Kosovo to prosper and for it to be acceptable, for it to remain a part of Serbia. I think in many cases it's ironic, given his intention in his actions, but it was the actions of Milosevic actually which have made it impossible for Kosovo to remain as part of Serbia and to make the case for a very different solution. Now, of course, dialogue and a mutually agreed solution politically would obviously be the best way forward. That is what everybody would aim for, and there have been exhaustive attempts to try to secure that, and a very well-respected plan put together by Ahtisaari, and then even when that seemed to falter, then further efforts made in the later months of 2007 to try to come to a solution. But it became clear that was not going to happen, and at that point we have a choice. Do we just do nothing? Do we just say, well that's it will just stay as it is, or do we act? And we've seen in the past sometimes the consequences of inaction in that area. I don't believe this is the best option, but in the absence of the best option, then I think you have to go for the least worst option, which I think is what this represents. So I think that is why I would say I welcome this declaration. Of course, nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody can predict every future consequence. But on judgment and on balance, I believe this will be and prove to be the best way forward. I would like some clarity from the Minister, in particular on his written statement, however, when on the 19th of February, the Foreign Secretary talked about this being the last remaining issue in the Balkans. I think that may be perhaps slightly optimistic. I wonder if he could clarify whether he really believes that there will not be similar issues like this going forward, because it seems to me that we're actually at the start of a process here rather than towards the end of it, which the word last remaining issue might suggest. Moving on, just to touch on a couple of other points, the prevention of the ethnic violence has clearly got to be a priority. We have British force on standby, the 1st Battalion of the Welsh Guards. We all hope it won't be needed, and it would be interesting to know whether the Minister thinks it will need to be deployed or not. But it is right that we should take that responsibility and try to aid the security of the area. And as I say, the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury and Action set out some of the great problems of the Serb population within Kosovo, and it's very important that those minority rights are safeguarded, as well as having guaranteed places in the local government, parliament, police and civil service, and the EU staff have got a crucial role to play. I want to wind up very shortly, but just to say that the challenges ahead for Kosovo are not just political. This is a country where the economic situation is dire, with unemployment of over 40%, very little industry, even electricity and other infrastructure is intermittent, and of course, like in sadly so many countries, there are problems of corruption. And it's clear that we don't have success yet, and as well as success being measured by peace and security in the general area going forward, it will also be measured in the development of the Kosovan economy if it is truly to be able to be a stable place within the region. I do believe the future vision we must be aiming for is for Kosovo and Serbia and the rest of the Balkan states to join the EU, and even critics of the EU, I think, would agree that for the past 60 years the EU has been very good in preserving peace and security amongst its members. I will, but I'm very keen to finish.
Bill Cash.
A European Union based on the association of nation states cooperating but not coordinated would be a solution, but not to put them into a compression chamber.
Now eating into the other front bench spokesman's time, so please be brief.
I will wind up. The honourable gentleman makes a very important point. This is clearly a sensitive situation in the very early stages. The prize is a wonderful one to aim for, but the government will know how important and delicate it is to secure the peace and security in this troubled region.